Good afternoon and welcome to today's training. My name is Sharon Blackman. I'm the Director of Training at Families Helping Families of Greater New Orleans, and I will be your presenter today. At the completion of today's presentation, you will be provided with a resource list containing all the links contained within this presentation, so don't feel like you need to be writing everything down or taking screenshots. We have them compiled into a single document, and you'll be getting all of that. You'll be getting the link for the Independent Futures That Work toolkit, which you should have received by email before the webinar started. Let's start by getting a feel for today's participants. In the chat box, let us know what role you play in transition. Are you a youth or a young adult with a disability? Are you the parent of a youth or young adult? Are you an educator, a service provider, another professional? I see a couple of parents. We always love having parents. Thanks so much for being here. Parent of a 17-year-old. God bless you. Professional and an adult with a disability. Other professional. Professional provider. Program monitor with an LGE. Parent of a 19-year-old and a professional. I'm so happy to see you guys who are parents of teens on these webinars. And I recognize names from the other two that we've had. This is our third in this series. Grandmother with adult 28-year-old. Okay, professional provider. Both parent and workforce development researcher, professional. Great. Thank you so much for doing that, participating with me. The purpose of this four-part training is to introduce work to youth with disabilities and their families. Many families or caregivers of youth with disabilities aren't aware of the specific skills that youth and young adults need in order to be successfully employed. And sometimes they're not aware that those skills are not going to necessarily come naturally as they do with perhaps, typical neurotypical children at that age. They automatically start doing some things that are employment related. Sometimes our kids need more education on employment skills. Also, many are not familiar with the laws that are available to ensure the youth's rights are protected. We did talk about laws in the last webinar last week on Thursday. That should be on our website. If it's not on our website, it's definitely on our YouTube page. So if you weren't able to attend the last two of these series, they are on our FHF YouTube page. We'll be sure that you have access to that. So this is the flyer for this series of webinars entitled Introduction to Work for Young Adults with Disabilities and Their Families. And every week we've been doing a different work-related topic. In the first webinar of this training series on September 7th, we examined the family and education's role in supporting youth to acquire appropriate work and career-ready skills. The second part, which was on September 14th, last Thursday, we provided an overview of laws that support youth with disabilities and career readiness. Today, for the third part of the training series, we'll introduce you to this Independent Futures That Work project resource called Working Independently, Here We Come, and it's a checklist. And also we'll talk about the work and career readiness skills that are identified in this resource. Next Thursday, the last and fourth part of the training series will provide an overview of resources available to support the development of the skills identified on the checklist. And I do have kind of a very large resource for you next week. So if you have not already registered for next week, please do that. And I will get you the resource. The resource is going to be very important that is included with next week's webinar. So you'll note on this slide, you have links to the weeks. So next week, the 9/28, an overview of resources to support the development of skills from the Working Independently checklist. That is a link for you to register. And when you get the slide deck, I'll email that to you later. When you get the slide deck and download it, these links will be live. This training project is funded through a grant from the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Special Education and Rehabilitation Services, or OSERS. Also the Rehabilitation Services Administration, or RSA, and it's a project of the Alabama Parent Education Center. The RSA Parent Center region that compiled this project includes Parent Center partners in Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas, Arkansas, and Oklahoma. And of course, our center, Families Helping Families of Greater New Orleans, is the Parent Training and Information Center for Louisiana. So we had staff that were involved in the creation of this training as well. The Independent Futures That Work project works to ensure that individuals with disabilities and their families have the skills and knowledge necessary to effectively advocate for those vocational, independent living, and other rehabilitation services. So let's get into the meat of today's presentation. Today's webinar focuses on 9 key employment skill areas, and we're going to go through those with a little bit of an explanation about each skill. So we'll be discussing the following key employment skills: organization and time management. You can see these are all of these are kind of huge for, for quote unquote our kids. Self-determination and self-advocacy, safety, financial management, job seeking, job keeping, effective communication, interpersonal skills, and personal skills. Now, the first area that we'll talk about is organization and time management. Youth and young adults with disabilities need to know how to manage their time effectively so that they're on time and can keep up with scheduled events in their lives, especially in the workforce. So skills covered under the area of organization and time management include using a calendar to keep track of school, work, or personal activities, telling time on an analog clock as well as a digital clock, because those are 2 different animals, using alarms to get up on time. If you have a teenager or older and you have not started using an alarm clock, that's a very good thing that you can already be working on. I've started that now with my 10-year-old. I started it right before she turned 10. And it's really, kids need to learn that because it's a very important part of becoming an adult, being able to wake up on time. Also using timers for reminders, making and following a to-do list, getting to activities and events on time. These are all things, as you can see, that we can be working on at any age, not necessarily just when it's time for them to look at getting a job. Another one, breaking large tasks down into smaller, more manageable steps. Setting long-term goals, which is, sometimes it's hard to look beyond today when so much is going on today, but thinking about long-term goals and then creating the steps needed to meet them. And if your child is still in school, you can make some of those long-term goals part of their IEP, so that, part of the IEP after they become transition age, which is 16 or older in Louisiana. But setting long-term goals, creating steps to meet them, and also getting the rest of your village on board, like the teachers and the people that work with them at school. Also having a cell phone with apps for daily use and living. There are so many great technical things now that can be beneficial for adults living with a disability, and there are great apps on that you can get for your cell phone that are amazing with helping folks to stay on task and to keep things together. So teaching youth how to use technology and devices with those apps can help to support skills development in organization and time management. I know for me personally, I use my my calendar is my Bible, and I do everything by my Google Calendar, and I set up tasks At work, I set up tasks on my Google Calendar. Instead of putting a Post-it, which I was so bad to do, instead of putting Post-its everywhere to remind me to do things, I set it on my calendar, and it stays on the calendar every day until I check it off completed. So that's very helpful. So we will discuss resources for working with your youth with disabilities in part 4 of this series next week. Now let's look at the second skill area, which is self-determination and self-advocacy. And a reminder, you don't need to be writing all this stuff down that you see on the screen, because you will be getting the slide deck. Self-determination and self-advocacy skills are critical skills for youth and young adults with disabilities to learn, because it involves making decisions for themselves and also being able to ask for the things that they need. And you are, as a parent, if you are a parent or even a professional, you're not going to be there all the time. So we really need to be working with our kids to make sure that they can request the things that they need in an appropriate way. So skills in this area include knowing their rights related to employment for people with disabilities, knowing how to ask for help appropriately, recognizing harassment situations and knowing how to report that. And that's big, because especially if you have a young adult with autism, they may not really understand, or, since they don't read social cues as well. And a lot of people with intellectual disabilities don't read social cues either. So recognizing when they're being harassed and knowing what to do about that. Another skill would be making informed decisions, getting information before you make a decision, taking action when it's needed, expressing your needs and wants to others, and understanding appropriate social cues and behaviors in the workplace. And again, adults with intellectual disabilities have a difficult time sometimes with the social cues. And so much of what we do, even on the job, is dependent on social cues and social, understanding the social part of working makes it a much more comfortable place to be. Self-determination and self-advocacy are critical skills needed to be able to work independently. There are many other self-determination and self-advocacy skills that related to living and learning independently, but this presentation focuses on the area of work or employment, and resources to work with youth with disabilities on this skill area will also be discussed next week in part 4. The next area on our checklist is safety skills. These are skills that are needed for keeping yourself and others safe in a work environment. And the skills on this checklist include knowing how and when to call 911. And if you've never used a cell phone, and y'all, this is something that when my daughter was little, my son doesn't talk, so we didn't go through a lot of this stuff with him, but when my daughter was little, I realized that calling 911 was no longer simply picking up the receiver on a phone and punching in 911. So when she was about 4, I sat down with her with my cell phone and showed her first how to unlock it, which I know is kind of dangerous with a little one, but I had to show her how to unlock, with my little diagram that I, you can use a pen or a diagram, or you can just leave it unlocked. But I showed her how to do that and showed her how to pull up the keypad and then how to call 911. Those things are not as self-explanatory as they once were if you're not accustomed to dealing with a cell phone. So anyway, other skills, knowing how to safely operate equipment on the job site. And that can mean a lot of different things, from a fax machine or, a coffee pot to, front loader. I don't know what kinds of jobs they'd have, but even saws or, all kinds of equipment. Knowing and following safety procedures at the workplace, following directions to safely operate equipment on the job, and then knowing who to contact if you're injured. Very, very important. And just keep in mind that there are many needed safety skills, but the ones on this checklist are designed to focus on those that are needed in a work environment. Lots of other safety skills we could talk about in life, but these are the ones that are primarily job related. So the next area is financial management skills. And these are skills needed to manage money, getting a paycheck, paying taxes, and other financial matters that are related to work. So the skills on the checklist that will be covered is knowing what payroll deductions are, knowing what taxes are taken out of paychecks and why, completing financial forms for employment, which honestly I still don't do very well, but W-4s, state tax forms, all those things. Opening a checking or savings account, tracking banking transactions and balances, checking on going online and looking at your checking account, making sure that all the charges on there were ones that you made. And then just understanding how people get paid. And of course, there are a lot of other financial management skills, but these are the ones that are related to employment. The next skill area is job seeking, and this area focuses on those skills needed to seek and gain paid employment. The skills covered on the checklist include identifying places to look for job postings, preparing a resume, completing a job application, writing a cover letter, developing job interview skills, dressing appropriately for job interviews, and following appropriate hygiene for interviews. Some of those skills will also be appropriate for those who are seeking volunteer or unpaid positions as well, like the resume, the job interview, and of course, appropriate hygiene is a good one to have regardless. And the next skill area discusses the skills that are needed for keeping or maintaining a job. Skills like understanding job expectations for work attendance and punctuality, working without supervision, which is huge, understanding how to request time off for sick and vacation time, demonstrating a positive work attitude, completing necessary job forms like timesheets, time off request forms, etc. Understanding how to keep track of time worked, wearing appropriate and clean clothes, maintaining acceptable hygiene, again, having reliable transportation to and from the job. And even if that means, using the RTA, but understanding transportation and knowing how to use that to get to and from your job. And then using a visual schedule or visual directions to accomplish job tasks. The next area involves communication, the varied types of people that youth and young adults with disabilities will need to communicate with on a job might include employers, of course, coworkers, customers, and clients. Skills covered in this area are asking for feedback, which, not all of us do that. And that's probably not the very highest thing on the list, but, it's important for them to say, to know how to say, ask the boss, for example, am I doing this correctly? Is this how you want this done? Other skills, using appropriate language on the job site, being aware of and managing your own body language appropriately, managing your voice control appropriately, knowing when it's okay to be loud and how to use, a conversational volume on your voice, holding a conversation with others, being polite to others, and then accepting feedback from supervisors or coworkers. The next area addresses interpersonal skills that are needed to successfully interact with others on the job. And skills in this area include demonstrating friendliness, adaptability, and politeness in group settings, demonstrating speaking, listening, and social skills as a member of a work team, interacting appropriately with those in authority, interacting professionally with coworkers, responding appropriately to requests from those who are in authority, and also from coworkers and customers. And also understanding some things about work ethics. And the resources, again, will be covered next week in part 4 of this training, the resources to assist youth to develop these skills. The final area is personal skills. And this area involves some skills that are like skills in other areas. These are the ones that influence how a person acts and how they complete tasks. Some of the skills in this area are working well as a team, demonstrating leadership skills, demonstrating a strong work ethic, when you're on the job doing your work, not playing on your cell phone, not spending too much time at the water cooler, those kinds of, developing a strong work ethic and demonstrating that, demonstrating problem-solving skills, demonstrating empathy for others, paying attention to detail regarding your job, and keeping a tidy and organized work area. That's one that I could probably use some help on myself. And, these are all skills that we know that we need on the job. And sometimes, you realize that sometimes some of these skills are going to be more important than others, obviously. All right, the working independently, here we come, is a checklist, as I mentioned earlier, and it's designed to provide a listing of skills under these 9 broad categories that research has indicated youth and young adults need to develop in order to participate fully in competitive integrated employment. And that is what we want for our youth and young adults. We want competitive integrated employment. We don't want them to be working for 20 cents an hour. We want them to be making, real money for real work. So the categories, should sound familiar since they're the same 9 that we just went over: organization and time management, self-determination, self-advocacy, safety, financial management, job seeking, communication, interpersonal, and personal skills. And this resource that has all these checklists is what I sent you before, about an hour or so before the webinar started. And it's on the Independent Futures That Work website. If you're watching a recording of this webinar and you would like a digital copy of this slide deck and the Independent Futures That Work checklist, you can email me at Families Helping Families of Greater New Orleans at info@fhfofgno.org. And that email address will be on the last slide if you need to copy it down. Now, working independently, here we come, can be used in several different ways. One way you can use it is as an informal transition assessment. By checking off skills that the young person has already mastered on the checklist, you can then identify areas that need further development. So first, you would use this checklist to identify the skills under this area that the young person knows how to do, and then check those off. If you're unsure if the youth or young adult can do a skill, then ask them to demonstrate or explain the skills to you. Don't just assume that they know it. Youth and families can use the checklist once completed to identify what skills the youth needs or should develop to be prepared to enter the field of work. Parent centers, educators, and other professionals can use the checklist to facilitate discussions about job readiness and key skills. Also do some, maybe do some role playing, or, especially at school. And again, these are things that you can have put on your child's IEP when they're doing life skills or work skills. Most high schools now are doing something to that effect. But as they're working on those things, they can do role play, and they can work on developing the skills that are on the checklist. Transition goals for the IEP is what that would come under. The checklist can be used to identify areas of needed support and make connections to services that can support that development. And please keep in mind that not all skills identified on the checklist will be mastered by all individuals with disabilities due to the unique challenges of each disability and the just the uniqueness of each person. I mean, I'm not perfect at all of those things either. And please be aware also, there's not any particular emphasis on how the checklist is organized. The areas and skills under each area are not in any priority order. And they'll be learned at different paces and different times according to the youth and the young adults' individual needs. I've put in, I haven't done it yet. I'm about to put in the chat box the link to our very brief survey that we need for you to complete before we go. It gives you the opportunity to tell us what you think about today's webinar. Our funders require that we offer you the opportunity for feedback on these trainings. So these surveys keep our funders happy, and they keep these educational offerings free for you. And it also gives you a way to request a certificate of attendance if you need that for today's training. If you provide your email address and name in that question in the survey, then I will be happy, probably tomorrow or Monday, I'll send out the certificates of attendance. I'll also later on be emailing you with a copy of this PowerPoint. And when you download it, the links that were in the PowerPoint will be live so that you can just click on them and go to the source. Again, if you're listening to a recording of this webinar and would like to obtain a copy of the slide deck with the additional resources, please email our center at info@fhfofgno.org, and I'll be happy to send you the PowerPoint. Do we have any questions at this time? You feel free to open your mic if you prefer, or you can type them into the chat box. I think just looking at the lists of skills in each area is helpful, because a lot of times we don't think about, how to break down skills that are needed for a particular action or activity. So I think it's helpful just to look at the things that we can be working on, like organizing your time, learning how to use apps on a cell phone, using an alarm clock, those kinds of things. Next week, we will get into the actual resource and we'll go through that. It is what I emailed you earlier. And so you'll have time to look at that before next week. So I hope everyone will register for the last training in this series next week on Thursday at noon. Also, the following week on Thursday at noon, we have a presenter from Louisiana Rehab Services, and she is going to go over LRS with us. So that's another one following suit with this Lunch and Learn series. So it'll be a fifth Thursday at noon. We're offering that from LRS. All right. Thanks so much for your attention, and I hope you all have a great day. Please be sure to click on the link to the survey before you leave.